Good morning, everyone. My name is Marion Newman. My traditional name is Ngega, and as the co-founder of Amplified Opera and Artistic Associate of Confluence Concerts, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this exciting symposium, Grappling with Madama Butterfly today, Representation, Reclamation, Reimagination. To begin, I would like to share the land acknowledgement that Teiya wrote after we had an excellent discussion about what it is to engage in this kind of work, addressing appropriation meaningfully on these lands. The land on which the Butterfly Project began is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This land is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We acknowledge them and any other nations who care for the land, acknowledged and unacknowledged, recorded and unrecorded, as the past, present, and future caretakers of Tekaronto, the place in the water where the trees are standing in Ganyageha, or the Mohawk language. This project asks you to reckon with your own consumption, engagement, and appreciation of Eurocentric art forms. It also seeks to bring attention to the real-life consequences on the bodies and lands that have been taken away by systems of oppression, colonization, and imperialism, which continue to erase, undermine, and distort many vibrant and diverse Indigenous cultures in the name of art. As artists and art lovers, we now have the opportunity and responsibility to seek out theater and music created, led by, and for the people who these stories are about. Let these people help us humanize who they are. Let us be inspired by the spirit of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant to walk side by side, allowing space and respect for our differences, where we can build a foundation of empathy and compassion for real change to begin. Let us allow truth and understanding to permeate our hearts, because only then can we embark on the path to reconciliation. Hetmas, kumbari masho. Today's symposium is a coordinated effort by no fewer than 5 organizations: Amplified Opera, Confluence Concerts, the Canadian Opera Company, the Faculty of Music at the University of Toronto, and the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. The academic advisors are Dr. Carol Clark, Professor of Music at the University of Toronto, and Dr. Linda Hutchin, Professor Emeritus of English and Comparative Literature at the University of Toronto. I hope that you were all able to experience my colleague Teiya Kasahara's extraordinary film, The Butterfly Project, The Ballad of Chō-Chō San, which premiered last night on the Confluence Concerts YouTube channel. It is available there until February 25th, in case you weren't able to be there for the premiere, or you wish to watch it again. I know I will. Such a beautiful and provocative way to set the stage for our conversations today. Over the next 3 hours, we will be enjoying 3 panel discussions featuring performers, directors, administrators, and scholars, looking at the complicated history and cultural challenges of a historically beloved opera, Puccini's Madama Butterfly. Each panel will last approximately 50 minutes, 50, and in our 2 short intermissions, the young Japanese soprano Chihiro Yasafuku will introduce and sample a playlist of contemporary Japanese music that she has curated specially for us today. We are delighted to be welcoming 300 virtual symposium delegates who are enjoying the proceedings on the Confluence Concerts YouTube channel. We only wish we could all be together in person, of course, but we are thrilled that you are here with us for what I know will be a fascinating trio of discussions. So, to begin our first session, entitled Approaches to Producing Madama Butterfly, Considerations, Challenges, and Opportunities for 21st Century Audiences, and I will hand things over to the session's host and moderator, soprano Jaclyn Grossman, Program Associate for the Association of Opera in Canada and co-founder of the Likht Ensemble. Hello, Jaclyn.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I know you were on the channel last night watching.
Oh, yes. Wow, it was just unbelievable. I feel like I'm a little bit lost for words still to describe like how unique that like the work is. It really is fantastic.
It's beautiful. I found myself, I was warned by Larry Beckwith that it was an emotional ride.
Mhm.
And I always wonder if I will be hit the same way other people are. And I did. I found it really very touching. And I think that for me, as an Indigenous person who grapples with how to be represented, how to represent myself, and who to bring in on the teams that do that representing and figuring out, it really struck me just how vulnerable it is to put oneself out there. And Teiya did such a beautiful job. And I think one of the things that I loved the most was that instead of explaining everything, Teiya just did what they do and let the audience allow that to sink in. And that shows respect for the audience, that they will be able to figure out what they are seeing, what they are witnessing, what they are hearing, and also a respect for themselves to just be and to meld things together, to go back and forth between opera and original songs and other ideas that they brought into it. Yeah, it was a really moving and exciting thing to witness.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like I'm sort of repeating things that people said last night. So I apologize to everyone who's hearing me repeat myself. But I think, yeah, the bravery and the trust that Teiya brings to the table in these works is pretty exceptional. I think with things like trusting your audience to come on a journey with you, that is a different journey than other people have experienced before. It takes a lot of bravery yourself. And I think putting yourself out there in a digital platform while you're iterating a process and a piece and an experience and also an entire, relationship with an art form, that takes a lot of bravery. And I think it's quite inspiring for other artists, audiences, creatives who are grappling with the same issues. I think work like this is really quite exciting, and I hope a big part of the future of our sector.
Absolutely. And I know that Teiya brought a lot of different people in on their process.
Totally.
Scholars, excuse me, scholars, other musicians, etc., for ideas. And in that is building community of other Japanese people or Nikkei people who, and that means that they are not representing others without checking in and making sure that it's good with the whole community. And I think that's really beautiful, and it's a wonderful example of how we all need to work together to do this kind of work.
Absolutely. I mean, it's keeping our art form collaborative, even when we're working on projects that might not yet ask for collaboration, but we're inviting people into our space so we can learn, so that they can learn. And I think that's a very beautiful and important piece of what we do. And I'm seeing that we're at 10:10, so I think it's time for us to shift over into our panel discussion. Thank you so much, Marion. And thank you, everyone, again for joining us today for this conversation. I'm joining you today from Takaranto, also known as Toronto, which are the traditional lands of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chippewa peoples and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Today's session will explore what we should consider when producing a work like Madama Butterfly. What are the challenges, opportunities, and responsibilities that come with this piece? I'm grateful that we can hold space for these important conversations as we continue to grapple with and address the issues in our canon. I would also like to acknowledge that our conversation today might be sensitive or triggering for some viewers, and I encourage you to participate in the session in a way that's most effective and supportive of your individual needs. Today, we're joined by three extraordinary panelists who each bring unique knowledge and personal experience to this discussion. First, I'll introduce Teiya Kasahara, who is a multi- and interdisciplinary artistic artist, operatic soprano, and playwright, among many other creative skill sets and practices, as we have all seen. As a soprano, they have performed with the Canadian Opera Company, Toronto Symphony Orchestra, Theatre Gargantua, Tapestry Opera, among many more. And they are a co-founder of Amplified Opera and the current Disruptors in Residence at the Canadian Opera Company. In their artistic practice, Teiya explores the intersections of gender, sexuality, and race, bringing together a wide variety of art forms into their creative practice. And of course, Teiya, we are happy to continue celebrating the release of your beautiful piece, The Butterfly Project. So welcome back, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be in conversation today.
Oh, of course. I'll introduce our second panelist, the incredible Perrin Lich, who joined the Canadian Opera Company as General Director in March 2021, coming to the company with 35 years of experience in the performing arts as both a technical and artistic administrative expert. Perrin's vast experience ranges from head of lighting at the Glyndebourne Festival, technical director at the Welsh National Opera, and most recently as the managing director of Houston Grand Opera. Perrin has a really exciting background in fostering resilience in the opera sector, having led HGO through the devastating impacts of Hurricane Harvey and creating the new performance venue, the aptly named Resilience Theatre. So welcome, Perrin, and I'm really excited to hear about your perspective on resilience and canon and the sector, all important things in our time right now. Oh, Perrin, I think you're just muted on us.
Yes, I win the bingo for the muted person who tries to speak. Well done. Thank you so much for that introduction. I had 35 years of experience and veteran and experience laced through it. So I'm the old guy on the panel, but I'm thrilled to be here to talk about this very, very important issue and to share my thoughts and hear from others. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for being here. And our third wonderful panelist is the wonderful Jessica Johnson-Brock, who is the Director of Artistic Operations at Boston Lyric Opera. She comes to this position as the former Director of Production at Boston Lyric Opera and as a performing artist with a background in community programming, as seen with her work as a Holland Community Opera Fellow at Opera Omaha. Jessica has been involved in many innovative productions and works at Boston Lyric Opera, including the Mobile Outdoor Stages project, making opera accessible to the Boston community throughout the pandemic. I'm also very excited to hear more about Jessica's work alongside the BLO community with the Butterfly Process, which is a series of conversations and programs that re-examine the history and legacy of Madama Butterfly in our contemporary world. So welcome, Jessica. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really glad to be included on the panel. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Of course, of course. So I thought a nice way to start us off this morning is to ask an opening question of what is your personal history with Madama Butterfly, whether it's personal or less so. Does anyone want to kick us off?
I guess I'll start. Well, I'll work my way backwards. Obviously, yes, we have the Butterfly Project. So engaging with the Japanese melodies that were appropriated and wanting to elevate those and really look at the meaning, how they were originally composed, how they're still performed today, and engaging with those in conversation, kind of with my own artistic practices with electronics and delving away from opera, but using still operatic technique. I got to cover the role of Madama Butterfly here at the COC just recently. So that was really wonderful to be working in the score, in Puccini's score, in the Italian, again, in a very concentrated way. And then I also first performed Madama Butterfly with the Windsor Symphony Orchestra in 2020, right before the pandemic happened. And that's when this Butterfly project actually began. And before that, my fach was different. I never thought I would actually sing this repertoire. But now that I'm a bit older and I have a different voice teacher and working into different technique and different voice types, this role has become more accessible to me. And it was always something very, very far away because it was such a big iconic role. And I knew it was about a Japanese geisha. And even though I come from Japanese heritage, it was never something that I really looked at. It was just always kind of way, way off in the distance. I guess when Chō-Chō San is describing that, white ship coming into harbor in Nagasaki. So that's kind of my backwards way of describing it.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Teiya. Perrin, let's jump over to you.
Thank you, Jaclyn. Yeah, so my experience is slightly different. I was touring with a medium-scale opera company in the UK. We did 26 venues 43 venues in 26 weeks. So it was very intense touring. And we did a production of Madama Butterfly in repertoire with the Marriage of Figaro. And so my experience was very much, this was the first time I'd heard the opera. My family weren't into opera, they were more into musical theatre. And so when I started working in opera, I didn't know the canon at all. I'm not a trained musician. As I say, I came through the technical areas. And really my experience was going to these tiny little towns, and some big cities as well, but some tiny little towns all around the UK, and taking this piece of theatre and light and art into their community, and them just enjoying it as a piece of entertainment. This is 30 something years ago. 1985 I started with English touring opera, so that's how long ago it was. And to just watch an audience be transfixed by this beautiful music. There was no conversation about the appropriateness of presenting it, and it was just literally taken as a piece of entertainment. And we toured there to most places. We toured once a year, and this was a huge deal to that community. We would go into that community, and we would perform, let's say, Madama Butterfly and Marriage of Figaro in this case, and they would sit there, and then the applause at the end would be absolutely rapturous, and people would leave going, "Oh my God!" It's the only time we get art through the course of the year. And of course, again, a predominantly white audience in the majority of the cities would come and experience a predominantly white art form, and none of the conversations that we now are having were even thought of at that period of time. So really, my first interactions with Butterfly were a pure piece of musical entertainment in the operatic style. And then, of course, after the 35 years, that conversation has gone on. And to the stage where we're having symposia like this. But that was certainly my first introduction to Butterfly, was just a pure piece of musical entertainment, beloved by an audience and completely new to me when I started.
I mean, that's not a bad way to start out in the opera sector, certainly. And it's interesting to think about how different perspectives can be on the same piece when we come to it from such different angles. Jessica, I'd love to turn it over to you and hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. The earliest memories I have of engaging with Madama Butterfly as an opera was during my education, during my higher level education. I'm trained as a musician, trained as a singer, and it was a piece of Western music history, and that's what it was. And we studied it theoretically and examined what about it was unique and special, and what made it a masterpiece, what made it such a core piece of the canon. It was not at all a conversation about, much like Perrin's describing, it was not a conversation about, is this an example of appropriation? Is this example of sampling, if you take from the pop sector? So that's my earliest memories of it. And then as a producer, I've engaged with a few different organizations that have produced the work. And again, being a step removed from it, it wasn't a conversation. They were different productions were multiracial casts or all white casts, and never centering the Asian or AAPI voice in the conversation. Also on the personal side, coming up training as a musician, I never sung the role of Suzuki, but I was assigned that role in a scene, in a trio, in a multiracial cast that had, again, no Asian or AAPI representation. And I'm now coming back to, and I remember it feeling uncomfortable at the time, and I'm now coming back to that as we're engaging in this Butterfly process at BLO, and really spending a year examining our relationship to the piece. I find myself coming back to that and questioning further, what could an educational institution do differently? Maybe there is something to be gained by assigning that type of role to a white singer or a non-Asian singer, but we have to do that with a lot of other work. We don't just do it, put it on the stage and walk away. That's where I am with it today.
I think that's a really great place to be in exploration. And I think a whole other discussion we could run off into is how can we empower artists to have the confidence to speak up in these situations and say, I do or don't feel comfortable, and can we move forward in some new way? So I think that these are really, really wonderful questions you're all asking. And so since we've alluded a few times to the challenges in Butterfly, I would love to jump in and ask your thoughts specifically on what are our responsibilities when we program a work like this or other works that appropriate specific cultures or communities? How can we handle ourselves in these spaces effectively and in a way that supports these artists and creatives? Does anyone want to jump in first? I don't like picking on people because I don't want you to not be ready.
I'll jump in.
Awesome, yes.
You asked a really long, complicated question, I think, there. And I think you can start with what to me feels right now like the lowest hanging fruit of representation. I think that's the very start of that conversation. I don't think that it is like a predominantly white organization, arts institution. I don't think they get to check the box and say, like, we did it just because they have representation on their creative team. But I do think it is a place to start in making sure that if you're representing a specific identity, that there are people who do identify with that identity who are part of that creation process.
Absolutely. And I love how you pointed out that it's not just about who's on stage, but also who is around the room. Perrin, let me hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massively complicated issue because, Jessica's completely correct. Just ticking boxes is completely pointless and doesn't actually change the organization from the inside and have the conversations that we need to have. So, I will acknowledge that at times I struggled with the notion that Madame Butterfly must be sung by, well, for a start, an Asian singer. I think that's saying, oh, all Asian, as long as it looks Asian, then we can cast someone who looks Asian. But also, I mean, we did production of Madame Butterfly in Houston, where actually we could not find a suitable voice for the Madame Butterfly. One could argue we shouldn't have programmed it at that point, but actually in our Magic Flute production, which was playing opposite, we had both the Queen of the Night and the Pamina were singers of Asian extraction because they were cast because of their vocal quality in those roles. So I think it's more certainly, of course, much more complicated than just saying, well, we need to tick some boxes by having Suzuki and Butterfly as Asians. But then it becomes very much like there's an issue there about how you're having the conversations about casting, because in reality you should be casting from a wide group of people and really trying to find the right people. But the issue is when there are so few opportunities for Asian singers to sing roles that are seen at this stage is, well, we should give any Asian character should be assigned, any Asian roles should be given to Asian singers. I think that's a very tick boxy move. I think the conversation about how we continue to have proper integration on stage, proper representation on stage, as Jessica said, and also backstage, boards, all of that. Because again, boards aren't having these conversations. These are all management-led conversations right now. And in fact, it's hard to have those conversations because there's the defensiveness of people who are like, well, we've been supporting this art form for 400 years. What do you mean that you want to have other people around the table? Well, that's exactly what I mean. I want to have other people around the table. It's not that difficult. So I think it's it is a huge challenge because I think that if I was an Asian soprano, all I get offered is Madame Butterfly, that's not me expressing my craft as an artist. And again, that's an issue to me. I want Asian singers singing really complicated repertoire that broadens them as an artist, allows them to grow as an artist, and that's something that if you're invested in developing singers and allowing them to grow. And Teiya talked about her fuck changing. Okay, so if you lock yourself into doing Madame Butterfly for 10 years, that's a pretty uninspiring life for an artist. Artists love to grow, develop, challenge themselves, move into new repertoire. I think we're getting better at the training stage of widening the pipeline of people who have access to voice training, in studio performances, in studio settings and stuff. but again, there's a relatively small group of people.
Perrin, you've packed a lot into that response. I couldn't even begin to respond to everything you said, but I think you pointed out a few like massively important things, which is firstly, this can't just be a point of, showing something visually, but not doing the behind the scenes work. It's not just about the casting, it's about so much more. And it's also not about putting an artist in a box and saying, you are this one thing and we get to decide. So I'd actually love to just turn it right over to Teiya. Great timing to respond, because I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. Thank you so much, Perrin and Teiya. Let me hear your thoughts.
Yes, no, thank you both, Jessica and Perrin, for bringing up really great and wonderful points that really point out where the work could be happening more, like you said, on the board level, and not only with casting, but I think with who are in those positions of artistic power as well. Conductors, directors, they have a lot of say and choice, because many folks involved in an operatic production are looking towards those positions for final say and for leadership. So I think that's also very, very important. And like you said, I don't want people of specific cultural or ethnic backgrounds to be pigeonholed either, nor do I want that for myself. I want to grow as a well-rounded operatic artist, singing many different roles in the course of my career. But I also think we need to take into consideration our audiences as well, and the communities that we are presenting these works to, or that we're trying to bring in as well. Because if these works are continuing to harm folks, continuing to harm not only the artists involved, or and also the communities that we're trying to bring in, like, what is the point then if we are continuing this harm? So having these really important conversations, for example, what Boston Lyric Opera is doing is really powerful, and they're demonstrating such, I think, leadership as well, and how should I say, leadership in demonstrating that these kinds of things need to happen, that there isn't just like one way to solve this problem, and that we're not going to figure it out with one production or within a year. These are all going to be ongoing, iterative ways of trying to include more folks and trying to lessen the harm, because maybe the harm will always be there, depending on who the person is involved with the project. Thank you.
Teiya, could I just ask sorry, Jaclyn.
No, Perrin, please.
Just ask the question about what you mean by harming the people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean by harm that, for example, Madama Butterfly, depending on maybe the person, how they're interacting with the piece, like there's different levels of racism that is coming back maybe to the person who's involved with the piece, or cultural appropriation, or sexism, or misogyny, and different things like that. And what I've been learning a lot, that like myself as a Nikkei Canadian, as a person of Japanese diaspora, is connecting and responding differently to this piece than, say, maybe someone who is from Japan, who experiences the opera in Japan, who grows up in a homogenous culture where there's like, yes, I'm accepted as Japanese, I look Japanese, I'm in a Japanese culture predominantly, I'm speaking very generally right now, versus being in a country like the States or in Canada, where many people look different, and many people have a different connection to their cultural and cultural heritages.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful.
I'd love to expand this conversation a little bit more, especially because right now we're talking so much about how we engage with community, how we invite different communities to want to come to the opera, to feel confident coming to the opera. I would love to hear all of your thoughts about how, when programming a work like Butterfly, we can invite communities, specifically Asian communities, to want to come to the opera and feel comfortable. And I'd actually love to turn it over to Jessica first, because I'm sure you have a ton to say specifically from your experience with what's going on in Boston right now.
Yeah, you would think that, but I right now have more questions than answers on the topic. I think that's actually been the kind of the gist of this year-long process that we're undertaking, this butterfly process that we're undertaking at BLO, is we need to take the time to examine a piece within its context, yes, in history, but within its context in this moment in our history as we're living it. So when the piece was programmed at BLO, it was programmed for the fall of 2020, and we all know what happened in March of 2020. So it was postponed to the fall of 2021. And as we started to examine how to put that work on stage, as we started to look at coming back to live performance, and that being the first piece of art that went up on our stage, we looked around and realized we were living in an American society that was constantly experiencing trauma, and that was especially pointed at the Asian and Asian American community right now, that there's been a drastic increase in hate crimes and violence against Asian and AAPI people here. And so what does it say to put that piece of art on the stage as the first piece back? It felt in that moment that we could not do it responsibly, which is why we've shifted and taken on this other version of examining the piece and engaging with the piece. But we're also talking about audience as a monolith. It's not. There are a myriad of reactions to us engaging with the work in this way, taking it off the stage. And some of those are very positive, and some of those are not positive, and some of those are more neutral and just wanting to learn and engage. So again, I don't know that I have an answer to this other than to take time and not just think about the intent of your art, but think about the impact, and think about that impact from a variety of perspectives, not just a funder perspective, and not just a community partner perspective, and not just a general audience member perspective or an artist perspective, but you have to take the total of that, and find the way to produce that art that will be most meaningful and least harmful, to Teiya's point.
Jessica, I mean, you're saying you don't have answers, but this sounds pretty fantastic to me. I think you're quite right that having the answers isn't the goal, but more so to listen and consider how we can consider the impacts of our art across the board on every level, where everyone has a seat at the table. I think that's really wonderful learning. Teiya, let me throw it over to you, and also ask, along with how can we bring more communities to the opera and allow them to feel confident, but also, how that process has been for you and the work you're doing with the Butterfly Project. I'm sure that's a really big piece of what inspired your work. I won't lead you anymore.
No, thank you so much. I think thinking about audiences and thinking about communities that maybe could possibly or do identify with the work that is being programmed. I look to the larger companies that are doing great work with outreach. And then sometimes I think about, how is that sustained? There's so much work in terms of building relationships. But in order to build a relationship with a said community, like, it takes so much time and it takes so much trust, right? Because if that has never happened before, I think maybe there could be a little bit of defensiveness, or just being like, well, what's the agenda here? And is this going to be long term? Is this just a short term thing? So I think being as open and honest about expectations, or about being flexible to change those expectations of the kind of relationship that will be happening between, say, like a company and a community of certain cultural identities. I think that's really important. Just cultivating that communication, that transparency, so both parties can really be aware of what those expectations are. Because it is hard to reach everyone, right? It's hard to reach and to sustain those relationships. So sometimes I think about that, a company or an organization doesn't have to do everything, and that's why we have multiple arts organizations in a thriving city like Toronto, that are doing different things, because it is really hard to serve everyone. And just to recognize that it's okay to do this and to do this really well, but not to do everything. maybe not, and then be missing some key steps there as well. So I just spoke to the first part of your question. I can ramble on about Butterfly Project anytime.
That's okay. We'll get there.
Okay.
And I love that you're throwing it back to collaboration again and open communication. I think you made a really interesting point that we know the expectations when we go to the opera. We know what the opera expects of us. But what are our expectations of that space? And are they being met? And if not, why not? But that's a really great way to look at it. Perrin, I'd love to throw it over to you now and hear about, the process at the COC and also beyond with productions you've worked on.
Yeah, it's interesting what you just said there, Jaclyn. I'm not sure is true. We know the expectation of us when we go to the opera. Well, a tiny fraction of us do, because we had the ability to work in opera or attend an opera. The vast majority of people, and we just have to be really honest about this, the vast majority of people, opera is an irrelevance to them. It's an art form that they've never experienced. They may have heard in a few adverts. That's about it. So from my point of view, trying to market or get people to come to see Madame Butterfly from the Asian community it is kind of ridiculous, because it's saying, here's one piece of art that you might like because you're Asian. From my perspective, the work for instance, San Francisco Opera did, and I'll talk a little bit about Houston after that, where they commissioned a piece called I always want to call it The Hunt for Red October, which will be an amazing opera, but it's actually called The Dream of the Red Chamber. And The Dream of the Red Chamber was written by, I'm not 100% sure on the actual country of the team who put it together, but it is a Japanese story told by people who understand where it comes from, where it's grounded in, and are using opera to tell that art form. That's a piece that for me is much more interesting to engage with the community and say, we're using creative people from that background. We think this is a story that you will resonate with you. You've known it from when you grew up. And by the way, we are also in the course of this season doing a show that's completely set in Bohemian France. We're also doing a show that's set, and we're also doing a show called Madame Butterfly, which was written by a white person, but is based in Japan. And again, asking them to experience art through a creative process and a creative buy-in feels a much more authentic relationship to me. So I think that we're not trying to grow an Asian audience with when we program Madame Butterfly. There are a whole lot of other reasons why, which we will discuss about why we program it. But I'm not sure that saying that how do we attract an Asian audience that hasn't been to the opera to come and see Madame Butterfly. I don't think that's what we should be doing. I think we should be saying there are projects which will resonate with you, and this is a European form of telling that is telling stories through words and music, but it's quickly now and very quickly growing into something that's a world art form, and there will be many more influences in that. There'll be many more stories to be told, and that's not before time, but that's why you should be excited about the future of opera, because you actually will start to see representation of stories that haven't been told up to this point, and that's what I think draws a new audience in. And then we get to look at the historical canon and say, some problems with this piece. It was written at a time where those problems weren't being discussed, and how do we approach it? And that's what we were trying to do at COC. Had we been able to do performances of Butterfly in January, that's what we were trying to do, was to say, this is when it was set, this is the framework around it, and this is how we want to tell that story now, acknowledging that's still evolving as well.
I mean, absolutely, Perrin. It's coming back to your earlier point about it's not just about one small piece of who we cast. It's about the stories we tell, the people in the spaces who are creating the stories and sharing them, etc. You've certainly led me into a question that I have for you quite well. So I'll jump over there and ask, starting with Perrin, but I would love to hear all of your thoughts on what the role of canonical opera is when it comes to the resilience of the opera sector. I know that's a little bit of a convoluted question. I'll say it again. So what are canonical opera or canon of opera? How does this impact the longevity, the resilience of opera as an art form? Perrin, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know resilience in opera is quite strongly your background.
So opera is an art form, excuse me, that has had an evolutionary journey from Baroque music right the way through, and there are significant milestones and pillars, if you like, within the way that opera is being composed, the stories that are being told, etc. That is now changing at a frightening speed due to the fact that conversations are happening in this, in the world about many different things, but racial equality, gender equality, all of those things are now conversations which are happening. And of course, art always leads those conversations, whether it's opera, whether it's visual art, whether it's performance art, whatever it is. Art helps people to break down their feelings and really examine who they are and who the community they live in, etc., etc. Opera is just a part of that world. So we, as producing organizations, you can either follow that trend, or you can try and help lead your stakeholders and the people who are involved with you in that route. You can't ignore the history of it. You can't say, well, everything that went before this period of time, we're now not going to do. We're not going to talk about. We're not going to. So there are a reason why people love the music that Puccini writes, and therefore, I think that the conversation about, look, this is the historical time that it was written in, and this is how we're addressing some of those issues. And we're also continuing to move the conversation on by having things like the Butterfly Project happening, or there's a piece called M Butterfly that's being done at Santa Fe this summer, which again tells a different perspective story, a different angle on the story. So I think that there are so many things that can help illuminate the conversation, and our job as arts organizations, I think, is to allow people to have conversations about it without feeling, oh, I need to do this because it's the right thing to do. I don't want anyone to do the thing that they think is the right thing to do. I want them to listen to what the conversations they're having and form opinion and build on that opinion and their thoughts, and then help to talk to other people about it. That's when the arts groups really starts to have a community footprint that is real. Because if you can do projects that surround work that then allow new people who haven't had a voice before to have conversations, that's when it starts to work well, I think. So the canonical operas, again, the misogyny, the fact that women always dies, all of those, that's the facts. That those are the operas that have been written to this point. They're not the operas that need to be written into the future. We need to see role models and different stories being told that maybe don't always end in death. I mean, it's just an old-fashioned idea there. But it's really important that we carry on developing the art form, because there are stories that can tell the story of empowerment, the stories of journeys, whatever that journey may be. Those are I think the operas which will resonate with people. And we can't, the past is the past, and we put the framework around it. We try and explain it. We don't just go, we're doing Madame Butterfly because we can sell tickets for it. We examine it properly, and then we look at how we develop the conversation. Sorry.
No, don't be. I mean, we could all, I'm sure, talk here for 3 hours, so it's hard to squeeze this into 50 minutes. I love that we keep coming back to conversation and listening and making space at the table for everyone. And you wouldn't think that might be an answer when talking about, the importance of Butterfly in the canon and the longevity of opera as a sector. But it's amazing to see that it keeps coming back to this place of, we need to listen, we need to make space. Teiya, Jessica, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, if either of you want to jump in.
I'll jump. Thanks for that, Perrin. I just wanted to highlight again a few things that you said that really resonated with me about these new works, that are stories that are being created, that are rooted in that culture, for example, like the one that from San Francisco Opera that you mentioned, and also this idea that we need to add to the canon. We need to continue this evolution of this 400-plus-year-old canon that has been evolving, not only musically, but dramatically, and what we put on the stage. And I think utilizing a lot of our technology in the way, society is going forward these days. I think there can be more. There can be we can do more, you know, with putting resources and funds, and also just valuing the new creations and hopefully performing them and giving them a longevity, giving them a life in the canon so they can be added to the canon, for example. And so I really hope that programmers out there and large and small producers can really uplift these new works and give them life and let them tour all over the world or all over this country or the States. I think that will add to the resilience, you know, to really see how this art form can evolve, and to yes, very much, you know, keep the cores of this art form that we love, the operatic singing, the grandness, the immense ensemble that it takes to put on a production. You know, I know it takes so many years and so many resources to create a new work, to put on any work, even if it's Carmen or Barbara of Seville, but just to really push the boundaries, it would be really, really exciting, and to uplift them. Yeah. Thank you.
Jessica, can I just make a quick response to Teiya on something? But what we're expecting then is for people to be able to write a full opera straight away, and that's utterly ridiculous. No one ever came in writing a full opera. Well, maybe Mozart did, but very few people in the history of the world have ever come in writing a full opera. So it's giving people the opportunities to do the half-hour opera, the 20-minute excerpt piece, because that builds up to the stage where you go, fantastic. And they've developed their craft now to the, you know, opera is such an expensive business. You kind of only get one or two goes at it, and then you become a composer. Well, they did those two operas and they weren't very popular, so they're not being done anymore. We need to. There's no chance when you have such a small number of people writing those operas, if you don't give them room to grow their talent as well. And again, the vast majority of the composers who came through through some degree of support from either church, state, or community.
Of course, and I think maybe that's illuminating that the way in which we're training composers or giving composers opportunity to build, you know, their craft to that large scale opera, that we're missing some really important ways to train them, to support them so they can write these large works, you know, thinking about all the different funding that is there but isn't enough still to support this art form.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll impose my personal opinion just for a second and say I love that the conversation isn't about let's, you know, abandon the canon, but let's expand what is considered canonical. I think that's a really, really powerful thing to think about. Jessica, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this topic, and Perrin and Teiya, you didn't make it easier, because as you were talking, so many new things came to my mind. I think one thing that I heard both of you sort of allude to is the immense cost, the like financial cost of putting on an opera. Every time you open the doors, you lose money. That's just the reality of the art form and the structure that it exists in, at least in America, and I would imagine in Canada as well. So I think this question of resilience, of long-term resilience, is multifaceted, but the two pieces that jump out to me are the financial sustainability, the funding to make sure that we can keep doing this art form that we all care very passionately about and think has the potential to move people and change them. And then the cultural relevance component. And I think these can live together. They don't have to be at odds with one another. And I think that can be done absolutely through the development of new works. It can also be done through the examination and re-examination of the existing canon. And I think it is the responsibility of our arts organizations, and of me personally as an administrator, and of you personally, Perrin, as an administrator, to walk that line of how do we, you know, make sure that we're satisfying that desire for canon that, you know, is sometimes heavily affiliated with funding. And how do we also expand this pool and get people excited about expanding the canon, about new sounds, about different sounds. Many of those sounds, those new compositions, people have a preconceived notion that they will be not accessible to them in a musical way, in a musical language. And I think we also are not always on the same page about those being influenced by the canon. So there are many hummable melodies in new music. Does it have to have a hummable melody to be valuable? But for those folks who are tied to the canon and feel married to it because of its hummability or its approachability, that exists in new works as well. And so I think it's our job to walk that line and bring our audiences and donors along with us.
Yes, absolutely, Jessica. And I think it's a good question to ask is why did something succeed or not? What were the external factors that played a part? Was it, the funding? Was it the opera house that it presented it? Was it the team, et cetera? There's so many moving parts to why an opera succeeds or doesn't. And that's something to consider when we look at if something should be produced again. So really great points.
I think that there's a couple of things. I've seen a lot of new works, one in Houston in December, a couple in New York last week, that were very were very tuneful. And I heard people saying, it's okay, but it's just kind of film music, bland film music. And you think, oh, okay, so for those people, they were looking for something more edgy. Fair enough. One of them had a production that didn't, I think, service it very well, and therefore, people like, I said, but the piece of theatre, the piece of music, the voices, did you enjoy that? Oh, I love that. I thought it was amazing. Okay, so that, and again, you don't get many, because of the cost, you don't get many goes at this. So does that piece then wither and die and is discovered in 30, 40, 50 years' time as why didn't this take off? This is amazing. Or do people invest in that second production or that third production? And, again, some composers are better at listening to managements when they say, that's a little bit long. You should maybe look at, they don't want to hear that. So there's so many moving parts to it, which is why so few of the operas make it through. But this is, again, when we look at other industries, when you look at soccer, for instance, there are 100,000 kids who want to play professional football. And it goes whittle, and then suddenly you have the half dozen who make it by the very end of that. The pipeline for opera and composition is pretty small, and therefore, if you're only going to get one go at it and then be written off as, well, that wasn't successful, why would we commission another? That becomes incredibly difficult to grow your craft, because then you start to play safe, and that's again not what it is. Truly great composers have written passionately from their heart, and if people have liked it, then great. But sometimes they haven't been beloved in their own lifetime. Sometimes it takes a while for you to realize just how significant a shift in compositional style that was. So there have been style leaders who have never been popular in their own lifetime, and now we look back and I find obituaries so hard. The work of Sondheim being completely reevaluated only on his death. And I have no doubt at all that will continue through the next 10, 15 years of people doing productions and going, God, I wish he was here, because that piece has continued to develop. And he was his own. He didn't change his scores, but he was behind West Side Story, changing for Broadway and finding a new way of telling that story, because he acknowledged it was dated. He acknowledged that when he wrote it, he wouldn't have written the same piece 40 years later in the world we now live in. So again, there are so many opportunities to grow the craft, but I absolutely agree with you. It's broadening the canon. It's having new work that says, yes, this historical piece is definitely part of the history of opera, but it can't be, we can't just have conversations about Madame Butterfly. It has to be about the whole operatic repertoire, building something that people want to engage with and hear their stories and tell their stories.
Perrin, absolutely. I think so many good points made from everything from, new works look different because all opera is different. So you'll find the tuneful opera for the people who want tuneful opera, and you'll find the avant-garde opera for the people who want avant-garde opera, but we need to make space for these creative experiences so that we can have these new composers and this canon can expand. I'm aware that we only have about 2 minutes left. I don't know how this has happened. I think I would be remiss to just not prod Teiya to talk a little bit about the Butterfly Project. So Teiya, I would just love to open it up to you and just hear about what inspired you to create this and how you sort of came to the project. And I'll ask you to do that in 3 minutes. No problem, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, you totally summed it up, Jaclyn, in terms of what Perrin, you were saying. I wanted to also say that, like, there are, and now I'm going off on a tangent. Okay, I will rewind, go back to Butterfly Project. What inspired me? That I felt like something was written about my culture that I didn't really understand, and I didn't really have a say. And there was a disconnect there. So really looking at what was Japanese in there and what was connecting me personally was really the point of inspiration, which led me down a path that I never could have imagined, exploring these melodies that were coming from such a vast artistic well. They're not just folk songs. There's naga uta, there's classical singing, there's even like the Japanese national anthem, which is in there, as well as a bit of the the American, that kind of thing. But wanting to also bring this opera that was composed in 1904, I believe, and these songs that were from the Meiji era and earlier, to bring them into a contemporary context here in 2022, in my body, in a mixed race Nikkei body, in a trans body, in a queer body, and like what that means, singing this work and these new things in this context. So it was bringing in, I don't know, I feel like I am bringing in many threads that I'm still in the process of understanding, still in the process of wanting to explore and to go deeper, because I feel like I'm just now on the surface of something that is larger and that maybe could be applied to other works in the canon that I have a personal relationship with, or even beyond, where I can make space for others to be able to investigate and feel supported and feel safe to go on those journeys as well.
Thank you so much, Teiya. And I'm realizing we're out of time and I've made you cram so much into such a short window. But I'd love to thank all three of you for being here for a really, really fascinating conversation. To our wonderful audience who's joining us today, everyone at home, thank you so much for being here. Please stick around for the rest of the morning until 1 o'clock with incredible panels and conversations all around how we explore and understand Madama Butterfly as a work and our operatic canon. So thank you so much again. And I'm excited to introduce Larry Beckwith, who will continue to carry us through this exciting day. Thanks everyone for having us here again, and have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks very much, Jaclyn. What a wonderful job you did this morning.
Thank you.
Conversation.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like we could have talked for much longer, but I hope we packed enough into a short window.
Well, I think it set us up for the second and third sessions as well, too. So these there have been many topics raised in this first session that I think will be continued to be grappled with in the next sessions. So thank you for your wonderful hosting this morning, Jaclyn.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here again.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Larry Beckwith, and I'm the artistic producer of Confluence Concerts, one of the co-presenters of today's conference, Grappling with Madama Butterfly Today, Representation, Reclamation, Reimagination. We're grateful to be partnering with the Canadian Opera Company, with Amplified Opera, the Faculty of Music at the University of Toronto, and the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy for this event. And we're so happy to have registrants tuning in from all over this morning. It was referred to many times in that first session, and in case you were not able to watch the Butterfly Project, the Ballad of Chō-Chō San, Teiya Kasahara's gorgeous show, it is available on the Confluence Concerts YouTube channel until February 25th to watch as many times as you'd like. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Linda Hutchin and Dr. Carol Clark, the academic advisors of today's symposium, and Taylor Long of the COC, and Jennifer Collins, the Confluence Managing Director, for their tireless work behind the scenes. We would not be able to be doing this today without their amazing work. Our second session, hosted by Dr. Carol Clark and featuring Ellie Hisama, Susan McClary, and Kuni O'Hara, will focus on inclusion and the pathway forward, tackling race and gender in opera. And we'll start in a few minutes. But right now, I'm delighted to introduce Chihiro Yasufuku, a soprano and student at the University of Toronto. And she's going to share some music from a playlist that she's curated, especially for today's event. Welcome, Chihiro.
Thank you very much, Larry, for the introduction. Hello and konnichiwa to everyone watching this live stream. I'm absolutely delighted to have had the opportunity to curate a collection of musical performances by some of my favorite contemporary Japanese and Nikkei artists to share with you today. So the first excerpt that you will be hearing features Japanese koto player Nanae Yoshimura, joined by Kifu Mitsuhashi on shakuhachi in the performance of Sogyofu. These 4 episodes for shakuhachi and 20-string koto were composed by Takashi Yoshimatsu, a currently active Japanese composer well known for his symphonic works, as well as for concertos for solo performers, including traditional Japanese instrumentalists. Please feel free to use this time to get your eyes off of the screen a little bit and get a drink of your choosing. So without further ado, please enjoy the finale to Sogyofu, composed by Takashi Yoshimatsu.
What a beautiful excerpt.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed that. And yes, if you are interested in hearing more music by contemporary Japanese and Nikkei artists, I highly recommend that you check out the full playlist, which will be made available later onwards. And also by visiting my very own Hibiki project, where I am joined by collaborative pianist Sakurako Jane Abe in the exploration and performance of various Japanese repertoire. So thank you very much for listening, and I will be back with some more music following our next panel.
Thank you,
Larry.
Yes, we will welcome you in about an hour's time after the second panel for some more music. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carol Clark, who is a professor of music at the University of Toronto and one of the academic advisors for this conference. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning.
And I will just say, please take it away to introduce our second session panelists and have a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Larry. And hello and welcome to everybody who's out there. As Larry mentioned earlier, this panel is entitled Inclusion and the Pathway Forward, Tackling Race and Gender in Opera. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome what I can only consider to be our musicological dream team. We have 3 speakers to join us who are deeply engaged in thinking about music in relation to gender, race, and ethnicity. Indeed, they continue to push the boundaries of musicological inquiry in opera criticism and in opera criticism more specifically, and they're raising the difficult questions relating to issues of representation and equity in performance. And today we hope to move the conversation forward a little bit in productive and inclusive ways. And although the focus will remain Madama Butterfly, we will inevitably touch on a range of topics that are relevant to our current time. So let me turn now to introducing our 3 panelists. We have Kunio Hara, who is professor of music history at the University of South Carolina. And we then have joined by Eli Hisama, my new colleague, who is now Dean of the Faculty of Music at the University of Toronto. Good morning. And then we bring in Susan McClary, who is the Finette H. Kulas Professor of Music at Case Western Reserve University. Welcome all. And I'm just thinking that, we of course are the ones who are pushing the boundaries on thinking about some of the difficult issues today. But I was reminded by Jessica's comment in the earlier panel about what she learned about Madama Butterfly in the music classrooms. And as educators, how we all have another role to perform in our classrooms, which is to ask brave questions as well. So listen, I'm going to turn it over to you all now to ask you to say a few words about yourself and why you find yourself here today, perhaps, and just some perspectives that you bring to the conversation. So I'm going to turn it over. Kunio, we'll start with you and then move on to Ellie and then Susan. So take it away, Kunio.
Hi, thank you, Carol, for this introduction. And also thank you for Dr. Linda Hutchin, Larry, and Marion from Amplified Opera and Confluence Concerts and other members of the organization that included me in this important conversation. And of course, to my panelists, Eli Hisama and Susan McClary as well. I'm an associate professor of music history at the University of South Carolina. I have been interested in the history of Japanese musicians, artists, and audience members' engagement with Puccini's opera Madama Butterfly. And I'd like to, before I go further, congratulate Teiya for their beautiful and moving performance last night I witnessed. And I think I share with many of you here that this was a very special experience. Teiya's performance last night participates in this history that I've been looking at that dates back to the early 20th century during Puccini's lifetime, where Japanese musicians and artists have been engaging with this opera in different ways. In fact, Teiya's performance last night ended with a recording, I think, of Tamaki Miura, who was a early 20th century Japanese singer, trained in Japan, but had a career in Europe and the Americas, singing the role of Chō-Chō San many, many times in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s. And Miura infused her performance of the butterfly with what she thought of as authentic representation of Japanese culture through costuming, makeup, wigs, and also through how she moved her body, used her body, right? This body comportment. She also drew on occasion performance practice from Japanese theatrical genres. So we know from her kind of recollection that she tried to emulate the vocal technique of gidayu, which was a tradition that kind of connected to kabuki as well as puppet play, joruri, bunraku, in the final scene when she reads the inscription on the dagger. And I think it's a clear connection between what Teiya did yesterday, incorporating these elements of Japanese tradition and trying to highlight, in contrast, Puccini's rendition and what is the original state of these art, and Miura's effort early in the 20th century. And I feel like there are many scholars have been trying to explore this history, including Mari Yoshihara, Shuhei Hosokawa, Arthur Gross, and others. But I feel like there's a need for scholars to kind of reach out and engage with the public as well as performers to really kind of share our knowledge and try to work together, because there are many questions that we have, we've been thinking about, and I'd like to kind of continue this dialogue. So thank you very much for this, inviting me on this panel, and I look forward to the conversation.
Ellie?
My name's Ellen Sama, and before I begin my talk, I'd like to thank Carol and Linda for inviting me to speak here today, and Larry Beckwith and Jennifer Collins of Confluence Concerts for their kind assistance. I'd also like to note that my remarks will include mention of acts of violence against Asian women. For the past few decades, I've been studying music in relation to race, gender, and sexuality. My first publication, an article on depictions of Asian women in Western popular music, was written in a seminar on music and postmodernism, which I took with Susan at the University of Minnesota. Susan's writings have made possible my work and the work of so many other musicologists and music theorists, and I would like to acknowledge the enormous impact of her teaching, writing, and mentoring. This article, titled Post-Colonialism on the Make, examines how East Asian women are represented as objects of sexual desire by white men, reduced to a race and a sex, in songs by David Bowie, John Mellencamp, and John Zorn. I argue that these cultural representations reinforce harmful stereotypes, which many of us have to live in. 1 year ago, I was invited to speak about this work at a university in Portland, Maine, in a class session focused on music theory and white supremacy. One student observed that my article, which was published nearly 30 years ago, felt very current to her, with so little change having taken place in social attitudes towards girls, women, and female-presenting Asian diasporics. On March 16, 2021, Robert Aaron Long killed 8 people in Atlanta, 6 of whom were Asian women who worked at massage parlors. This horrific act of anti-Asian hate brought sudden international attention to the racist misogyny faced by Asian women in North America. But there is still insufficient recognition of the harms of anti-Asian racism and the intersectional forms it takes in the spaces of music education and performance. Indeed, the media coverage and conversations have faded, despite the huge numbers of hate incidents enacted against Asians since the beginning of the pandemic, as measured by the organization Stop AAPI Hate, which collected 6,600 reports between March 2020 and March 2021, with AAPI women and girls reporting incidents 2.2 times as often as AAPI men, and AAPI non-binary people also reporting experiences of hate. A report titled "The Rising Tide of Violence and Discrimination Against Asian American and Pacific Islander Women and Girls" is available on their website, stopaapihate.org. Having had to combat and fight against the stereotyping of Asian women lifelong, I have never wanted to view Madama Butterfly, and squirmed as a student when it was brought up. Why subject oneself to visual and sonic depictions that reduce us to someone else's fantasy, reproduced in movies, TV, and stage? In the words of David Henry Hwang in his brilliant play M. Butterfly, "It's one of your favorite fantasies, isn't it? The submissive Oriental woman and the cruel white man." These cultural representations include the musical Miss Saigon, which transports the story of Butterfly to Vietnam and repurposes the horrors of the Vietnam War to a backdrop of yet another tragic and wildly commercially successful interracial love story. These are the narratives that resonate with people. We need more narratives. Teiya's brilliant reimagining of this work, which has had such a grip on Western audiences, is, for me, a much-needed revisioning of Butterfly. As they write in the program, which you may find online, quote, "I do know that I want to continue to be in conversation with all the elements that make up Madama Butterfly and other canonical operas in order to perform in ethical ways rooted in celebrating forgotten and misrepresented histories," end quote. This determined approach, guided by a sense of ethics, is key to our efforts in combating anti-Asian racism and misogyny. Other productions that creatively grapple with canonical works are Heartbeat Opera's Madama Butterfly, Mary Birnbaum's feminist direction of Britain's The Rape of Lucretia, and Brooke O'Hara and the Theater of the Two-Headed Calves production of Chikamatsu's Drum of the Waves of Horikawa. By revisioning works that, in the word of Malino Giulino, require us to, quote, "watch quietly and tolerate our dehumanization," end quote, many people will feel more welcomed and included in performance spaces rather than alienated by the stories told and the ways in which they are told. In the words of our ancestor Yuri Kochiyama, "Keep expanding your horizon, decolonize your mind, and cross borders."
So, Susan?
I think I'm here only for tangential reasons. I did write about Madama Butterfly some decades ago, and then forgot I had done that. But I was the one who started to raise issues of representation of women, of non-binary people, of race, of class in classical music. This has not been done before, and I received a lot of pushback, as you no doubt know. 30 years later, everyone is suddenly looking back and going, "Oh, yeah, she said that 30 years ago." But when there was a review of my book on Carmen, 30 years old, that had the title "Sexy, Classy, Racy." And I thought, oh, damn, somebody who really got it. And it was a scathing review. And the last sentence was, "But if you want to know about class, race, and gender in Carmen, this is your book." And I thought that was the best thing anybody could ever have said about that book. You know, that if you want to know about those things in this opera, which is about virtually nothing else, then this is your book. It took the murder of George Floyd, the slaughter of those Asian women in Atlanta, for many of us to realize that these are issues that have not been solved, and that the operas we subject ourselves to are just reinforcing many of these attitudes. So I'm particularly interested in the move toward deconstruction of these pieces. And I think that Teiya's deconstruction and reconstruction of Butterfly is simply extraordinary, in part because they bring their gorgeous voice. I mean, this is someone who has invested a lot in being able to produce those sounds that we all love. That's why we go to hear Butterfly. So she is invested personally, physically, in techniques of this kind. And she brings those to bear on her critique of Butterfly. We get to hear our favorite parts, but we also are being required to think about them in radically different ways. Yesterday, I was on a panel like this out of Leeds, England, where they were doing a similar project on Carmen. What do we do with Carmen? What do we do with Butterfly? I mean, these seem to be the pieces that are attracting the most attention. They are absolutely at the center of the canon. These are pieces that are repeated over and over and over again. And suddenly we are thinking about the racial other in Carmen, the racial other in Butterfly, the ways in which women are punished in Carmen for their excess of agency or for their absence of agency in Butterfly. There is no way out. And these pieces need to be studied very seriously. We need to think about ways of producing them so that they do not simply perform their magic and get away with it.
Yeah, absolutely, Susan. They're seductive. They pull us in, and it seems that the more exoticized and the more orientalized the character, the more seductive they are. And this is where they just become so problematic, right?
Right. And I would say, working off of what you just said, there is the impression that Butterfly is seducing us, right? And that it's sort of her fault. And Carmen is seducing us, and it's her fault. So this music that is so seductive is working against the people who are being depicted.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the text says one thing, or the setting, or the mode, but then the composers, these male composers, put some kind of musical setting, or it asks them to perform certain things. And I know this relates back, Susan, would you be willing to talk about your writing about the ways in which Puccini really heightens this tension between Madama Butterfly and what she is actually forced to say and sing and represent, but then how the music kind of ups that ante?
Sure. There's an enormous gap between what is presented as this very passive young Japanese woman who is, and the words are telling us all the way through that she's completely helpless. She's going to be a victim. She is a victim all the way through. There's a gap between that and the heroic voice that Puccini gives her. And to sing this role and to hit those notes and to maintain the show for the whole evening is a real athletic feat. But yet, this is put in the mouth of a woman who we are told is being duped into a false marriage. We hear this almost immediately when the curtain goes up, Sharpless tries to tell Pinkerton there's something ethically very problematic about this. He doesn't care. He goes on with his design. And he, so everyone is saying all the way through this that Butterfly is a victim. We are going to take her and mount her on a board like butterflies, like bugs. So, I watched this opera again the other night in preparation for this, and I thought maybe I'd been too harsh. I mean, many people love this opera. And I was just aghast all over again at how sadistic it is. That we see her being just dangled in front of us. The plot would not work if she were not this helpless victim. And that same day, I was teaching Rigoletto in my undergraduate class. And a young man who is actually Japanese American said, "Why is Gilda so stupid?" And I said, well, the progressive writers at the time, like Victor Hugo, like Dickens, they find that in their progressive politics, in order to critique the patriarchy and the power structure, they need to have this emotional engagement. And that is almost always done by this sacrificial female victim. That's what makes all of these stories work. And then I thought later, did I just excuse this piece and Butterfly and everything else by pointing to this? But we have this, I mean, not just in those writers, but Harriet Beecher Stowe. We have The Perils of Pauline. We have, I mean, this is one of our central narratives. You dangle a female victim to get sympathy for your progressive cause, which doesn't include gender. It's a different kind of project. And this worked very well for Hugo. It worked very well for Dickens. It continues to work in horror movies where we dangle a female victim. But very few of these things is as explicitly sadistic as Butterfly is, where Pinkerton says, "Oh, and we will rip her wings off." And I mean, when I watch this in a with an audience and I see everybody sniveling, I think, aren't you paying attention to what's going on here? This is absolutely horrible. And I have to think of that classic essay that Ellie wrote about John Zorn, who had on the cover of his album all of these dismembered Asian bodies. I mean, how explicit can you get? And a lot of people said, how dare she say something about John Zorn? And this is his artistic freedom that he is expressing. We should not go after this. I think, John Zorn did this the year before Ellie wrote about it. This is contemporary culture. This is being reproduced. I think we have to see Butterfly as part of a much larger picture of the narratives that we adopt and the reasons that we buy into them.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, Ellie Cunha, we need to bring you in here.
Susan, thank you so much for your, all the work that have been done for the discipline of musicology, and pointing to these, things are already in our faces and trying for us to think about it. And I echo Ellie in, thanking you for the work that you've done for all of us. But the particular kind of a sadistic impulse of Butterfly is, it is striking if you sit down and look at it very carefully. And I think the power of music that kind of sugarcoats that is the kind of a most upsetting part of perhaps this opera, right? And this made me think, why? So Butterfly, the opera has become more or less acceptable in Japan, and people who love Western style opera do kind of go to Butterfly. And I think the reason why that the work can operate in this Japanese context is that it does resonate with this traditional patriarchal society, or the cultural value that the opera represent, that seem to also relegate women's worth, value in a lower place than man's. And I think in thinking about the popularity of opera and why does it resonate with different audience members, I think is something that we have to dig deep into. So that's my kind of impulse right now, and I think it will be interesting to see how the reception has shifted over time, and how it should.
So I wanted to pick up a thread from the morning panel about the status of canonical operas. What do we do with them? Do we toss them out and just celebrate new works, or do we try to work with the canonical works? It's a very interesting discussion and one I've been thinking about. So to return to Teiya's work, for me, as I mentioned in my remarks briefly, that approach by someone who's thought very deeply and carefully and is positioned within and around the work is so important to work going forward. So I cannot see a traditional version of Madama Butterfly. I just cannot. I would not take the time to sit there and pay money and be there. Madama Butterfly is an opera that is chosen as one that the students at Columbia University must see. It is a requirement in a course called Music Humanities, also known as Masterpieces of Western Music. This course enrolls about 800 students per semester, so 1,600 students. They choose a different opera, but then I saw Madama Butterfly cycles back and back because it's at the Met. There was a very interesting op-ed by a student who was furious at having to pay money to go to this and to witness her own degradation, the person I quoted before. But I think in terms of, say, bringing Madama Butterfly to new audiences and new Asian audiences, I don't want to let that go, because I think there is still a lot to listen and to learn from new productions and critical work that for me is a very rich site of possibility. So I certainly support new opera by Asian composers, Asian American AAPI. One work I was thinking of is by Jason K.L. Huang called The Floating Box. I saw it at the Asia Society. It's a beautiful chamber opera, about 15 years old. I haven't seen it performed again, but why can't we experience those sorts of productions and pieces? And it's quite beautiful, based on archival work in Chinatown at Museum of Chinese in the Americas. But just returning to this idea of what do we do with Butterfly? What did we do with Don Giovanni? What do we do with all these pieces? I think there's something that can be done, and we need to make the space to have that work be done, which requires, as Perrin mentioned, management and people in charge of programming decisions.
I'm reminded of your, the one thing that never really seems to happen, this is not a unique comment, is that we never change the scores. When we mount, so Ellie, you will not go see Madama Butterfly. I have, across my career, refused to teach this piece until just this past fall, when I felt I had an angle in through what Heartbeat Opera had done. I now have another angle in through what Teiya has given us. But when how can we in the opera house, so invested in in producing something like Madama Butterfly, is there not some small way of deconstruction that can happen in this traditional space to make a signaling that we are realizing that there's harm and hurt being done here, and that we are not going to let Puccini and that printed score be the last say on this. And so, I mean, it just, I look at this and I say, why today in 2022 should we be showing a Japanese woman giving up a child? She's a mother. We don't talk about her as a mother very often, but a mother who might actually suggest that, sure, I'm subjected to shame in my situation now. If I give up this child and, you know, acknowledge my marriage is over, I'm actually also shamed by having a child. But I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. And actually, do I need to take my life? Is there some way that we could allow some kind of ambiguity in these stagings, or suggest that there are other possibilities? I have a sense that's what Heartbeat Opera with Ethan Hurd and the group were attempting to do. I have a sense that this is something that Boston Lyric Opera is trying to grapple with by saying, we're not going to mount this because we don't really know how to do it ethically. And now, how might we want to think about this? It's deconstructing even in the opera house, not in the periphery, but deconstructing on those main stages. Is it bringing in different sounds of music? Is it a recuperation of local aesthetics? Or is it changing the ending? Gosh, we've got enough new composers out there who could write us new music to put something in there. Is this something that opera houses ought to be considering?
You know, one of the things that I stress in my music history class is the invention of the idea of a canon, which doesn't happen until the Mendelssohns and Schumanns. I mean, this is really recent that we had a backlog of a music that we thought we had to perform over and over and over again. And I teach at a conservatory. I want them to know where this repertoire came from, where the performance practices came from. All of this goes back to the Schumanns and the Mendelssohns. This is not a very long time ago. What is involved in the cultural work of creating a canon? Who did it? How do you do it? How do you begin to build the kind of attention for today's music that will allow it to reach a much wider listenership? I mean, the doors slammed shut on the canon really about the time of Puccini. Nobody else needs to apply. We have our operas, we have our symphonies, you know, don't need anything else. This is a very pathological situation. You know, I mean, these depictions of Asian women aside, I mean, it's just pathological, and we need to think much more carefully about that.
So yeah, a pathway forward is one of the things we're meant to be thinking about here, and yeah, a pathway forward. I'd be interested in hearing your other thoughts on this.
So I'd like to pick up on this discussion about canon and also comment that Perrin made in the earlier panel. So and the idea that can we change Butterfly? So Puccini did change Butterfly multiple times. So Butterfly was a famous flop in the first performance, right? It's kind of part of the legend. And Puccini, but the publisher Ricordi did not give up. Puccini did not give up, so he had multiple chances to revive this opera, and it was altered many, many times, right? So there is this investment that we're talking about that a very, you know, in this case, a publishing house that sponsored Puccini, and Ricordi did invest in Puccini a lot. His first opera, the Villi, was kind of a student product. He composed right after he graduated from school, and performed modest success. The second opera, Edgar, was a flop, but recorded kept on paying Puccini stipend so that he can continue working, and then he hit the jackpot with Manon Lescaut, and then he was established. So there was this kind of institutional investment towards young talent, right, that existed in the 19th century, but it was becoming increasingly narrow. So there's only a few composers like Puccini by the time of the early 20th century in Italy. And in terms of Butterfly, La Scala recently did a production that recreated the original production of Butterfly. So this is available on DVD, and you can kind of see the production, at least the music, was reconstructed from the original score. And you could tell there are many, many more distasteful text and music included in the opera that was eliminated, more kind of a very purposefully kind of a disingenuous, belittling representation of Japanese people and culture. So Puccini was aware that there are certain things he had to change in order for the opera to improve, right? So I don't think that as a modern performer, audience, or producers, yes, we have this, like what Susan said, unhealthy, pathological devotion to text, printed music, but this is a living art form, and we have to intervene. We have to kind of change it so that it makes sense to our audience today. I don't think it's a disrespect to the art or the work itself. Although, if you want to challenge this work, I don't think we need to respect it in a certain way. But it's not the spirit of engaging with the work. I don't think it should be a controversial thing.
Right. So in our safe spaces that we're trying to create in opera houses and create community and discussion and making every artist feel safe when they are asked to do this work on stage, discussions around, well, if you're uncomfortable doing this, what can we do? And maybe changing Puccini or the score, or subtly a directorial change can actually make it possible for a safer space to happen. We've had a viewer or someone at this event talking about a Komische Oper Berlin production by Calixto Baito that did change the ending. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that. Are any of you familiar with it? Do you know what the changing ending was? Maybe our viewer here could tell us. What was it? The last 3 minutes that were changed. It would be interesting to know what that particular change was. But
right. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to add, I haven't seen the production, so thank you so much for the viewer to alerting me to this. I look into it. But one of the early sources that Puccini consulted, his librettist consulted, was John Luther Long's short story, Madame Butterfly. And the ending of the short story, Butterfly disappears with the child. So Pinkerton comes to the house. There's no sign of Butterfly or trouble. So the assumption there is that she has kind of escaped. Right.
Right. And that trouble, the child is no longer trouble. The child is joy, or some other manifestation of recognizing this maternal mother-child bond. Let's not forget that. So it's always suggested that too much that Pinkerton gets the last word. I actually would be interested to know, Kunio, you studied lots and lots of early productions of this opera, including ones that were entirely done in Japan in early years. Is there anything to suggest what it was like for a Japanese person to sing the role of Pinkerton? Whoa.
Yeah, that is, I haven't really, I've been focusing so much on Butterfly, Chō-Chō San, that I haven't really looked into Pinkerton, but I haven't really looked into it, but one tenor that was famous around, mid 20th century performing Butterfly. The role of Pinkerton was Yoshie Fujiwara, who was one of the leading tenors in Japan at that time. But he himself was a biracial singer. His father was a Scottish businessman, and his mother was a geisha. So he was literally kind of embodiment of this figure of trouble, joy, right, dolore. And he had this amazing career in Japan, and he does perform in Europe as well. So I haven't really dug into his narrative there, but it is a challenging, I think, role. But at the same time, it might be easier in the sense that you can kind of dissociate the character with yourself, and you can kind of play almost a caricature, because to some extent, Pinkerton does seem like a caricature of a man, right? A certain kind of man. Yeah.
Right. An American imperialist.
Well, yes, right, yeah.
Right. Other thoughts on that? Deconstructing, or the problem with all of these attempts is that the music is so compelling. The music is designed to push inevitably towards this conclusion. I saw a great production of Carmen some time ago, where Carmen, after she's slashed, after he says, "Oh, my Carmen, I'm so sorry," after the triumphal chords in the orchestra fade away, Denise Graves, who was Carmen, kept getting up and crawling through her gore, and then collapsing, and then propping herself up and crawling through her gore. And this went on for what seemed like forever. We didn't get closure. When the lights went down, she was still doing this. And nobody could clap. We just sat there. Oh my God. This, and you realized how much you needed that closure, because the full opera had been channeling us towards that moment. And when it doesn't come, it's really frustrating. And you think, die, you're supposed to die now. Oh, I didn't really want you to die, but you're supposed to die now. I mean, it put everyone in the audience in this position. It was sort of Brechtian, turning the mirror to the audience and making us realize our desires. And it was extraordinary. I think more productions like that can be experimented with.
So even one of the things you're suggesting, Susan, is kind of tweaking scores along the way, then, not just ending, but it could be through instrumentation, or changing audience expectations about what that sound world might actually be, that could signal something, that we're actually going to do something, in a more provocative way as we move through this. And it could be signaled through staging. It could be, I think, the idea that we just don't want to just keep reiterating these things, because the ways in which we can be perpetuating, unknowingly, perhaps, I don't think it's unknowingly, that you're doing Asian hate here. It's an anti-Asian sentiment that's being presented. I know I'm now, I think I'm able to understand why I couldn't teach this piece through this heightened moment of hyper awareness that we're all having. Yeah.
I mean, you have to realize how deeply embedded in the music all of this ideology is. So in the wedding scene, Butterfly goes dum bum ba dum. Puccini throws in an augmented chord, and as Pinkerton says, "Vieni, vieni, come, come," she has to go up a whole step. She has to do that 4 times. She is outlining bum 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 bum, which is Puccini's go-to Asian sound, that whole tone scale. You also hear that in Un Bel Dì. Bum, 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 bum. So, it's so deeply embedded in the score. I mean, what do you do with that? It's, and this is not to take away from Puccini's craft. He was an extraordinary composer. He really knows how to turn your crank. But there are so many things so deeply embedded in the music that it's very hard to keep it intact. As you pointed out, Carol, we change lyrics, we change staging, we change the time and place in which things take place, but we never touch the music, and the music is what really drives these things.
Right. So, Ellie, can I ask you to come in here?
Yes. Yeah, this has been a fascinating discussion. I did want to bring in the aspect of yellow face, which hasn't been touched on in this panel, but also thinking back to the morning panel with regard to who performs, who speaks, who decides, etc. And I also wanted to ask the audience, we have the perfect group maybe to answer my question. So when I was a child, I saw an interview with Jessye Norman, and I distinctly remember her saying she would never perform Butterfly. So I could not find, I know there's an infamous interview with Morley Safer on 60 Minutes, just awful, what she writes about in her memoir. I asked my friend Naomi Andre, scholar of Black opera, of course, about her recollection. So we had an interesting discussion about Norman was not, did not, to her knowledge, do that role, but also her voice maybe was not so suited to that. She was known much more for French and German rather than Italian. But then Naomi mentioned that there have been Black singers who have performed Butterflies, so Leontine Price, Camilla Williams. So I've been thinking about the sort of Afro-Asian dimension of performance. Like, what did it mean for these women to take on that role, and what does it mean in terms of racial representation, etc.? So my question to the audience, someone maybe can type it in the chat. If you do know of Jessye Norman saying this, I would love to have the source, because I've been looking and neither Naomi or I could find it.
Right. Yeah, interesting. So we'll throw that out, because there will be chat in the or conversation with questions in the last session. Also, I mean, I asked you historically about Kunya, about singing, Pinkerton being sung by an Asian. Thinking about casting today, I mean, so who's going to sing Madama Butterfly? But are there Asian singers who would want to step forward to sing the role of Pinkerton? The COC production kind of stuck to a racial casting that appears to be what the characters are here now. But when, we want to think that it's too limiting to exclusively think those ways. But would there be an Asian tenor willing to step up to sing Pinkerton? Or is that even an abomination to think about?
Well, I think it depends on the context, right? I think there are many tenors in Japan who sing Pinkerton, right? And it's a question of the audience. Who do these singers represent within the community? Opera is opera singers at a certain level do cross oceans to perform in different contexts, but to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any Asian American tenors that perform the role. I mean, there must have been in the United States, but think about that. Yeah.
Right. And is there the kind of jingoistic representation of the Star-Spangled Banner in the piece? I mean, I think there are multiple interventions that could happen in productions that would, tell audiences that we're up to something different here. And it's, if you want to see a traditional production, you can go elsewhere, but we're actually going to be kind of more ethically responsible, or we are responding to our artists in ways that suggest this is how. It's not going to be an administrative down top. It's going to be a fomenting of change from within. And and then maybe I'll be happier teaching this in the classroom. I have a sense that Teiya has given us a way into this, and I know I build on all of your work when in thinking about these things moving forward. But yeah, just the comfort level that we can make our own students have in the classroom around these things, and not just assume that, oh yes, it's a great masterwork, we're going to teach it, you need to know this, you need to know this form, whatever, and not actually deal with these issues. No, these are extremely important issues that are must be engaged in our classes. I've always hunted for a way into this, and so thank you all for giving me insights to this. It is time for us to wrap up here. I do want to thank all of you for joining in this, and thank our special guests, Kunio Hara, Ellie Hasama, and Susan McClary, for engaging in such a stimulating and thoughtful conversation. I know we could do much more. We're doing what we can now, but we're really grappling with things that haven't really been thought about so much before. This has truly been a learning experience for me, and I'm indebted to all of you. So thank you very much. I did want to point out to our listeners and viewers that we do have a kind of further list of readings that were assembled by the panelists here in sharing and thinking about this. And I know that's going to be, appears in the online program that Confluence has created. And I also want to thank my panel co-organizer, Linda Hutchin, for helping in realizing this event. Thank you, Linda. And Chihiro, who was a student in my class last semester, distinguished herself there. You are one who's giving us another inspiration here in showing us your insights around thinking about the ways in which Japanese contemporary artists are changing the conversation or contributing to it. So Chihiro, take it away. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carol, and it's wonderful to see you. For those of you who may have joined the live stream a little bit later, my name is Chihiro Yasufuku, and I've had the absolute pleasure of sharing some musical performances by some of my favorite contemporary Japanese and Nikkei artists during the symposium. For our second short musical interlude today, you'll be hearing Toru Takemitsu's Kaseki, the main theme to director Masaki Kobayashi's 1974 film with the same name. This piece is a selection out of Takemitsu's many, many film scores, one of the various genres of music that Takemitsu expressed a passion for throughout his career as a composer. Please feel free to use this time as a little stretch break and get your eyes off the screen, and please enjoy this musical excerpt. So I hope you enjoyed that musical interlude of Toru Takemitsu's Kaseki. As mentioned earlier today, if you are interested in hearing more music by contemporary Japanese and Nikkei artists, please be sure to check out the full playlist, which will be made available later onwards, as well as visiting my own project titled the Hibiki Project, where I am joined by pianist Sakurako Jane Abe in the exploration of Japanese repertoire. So thank you for listening, and I will pass the mic over to Larry.
Thank you so much, Chihiro, and it's been wonderful to have you share this music with us. I wanted to make one comment about Toru Takemitsu, and I'm so glad that you chose his music. And you may or may not know about his connection he had a long connection to Toronto. He came many times, I think, as a guest of new music concerts. And I remember one performance that of a piece that he wrote for the percussion group Nexus, which was based in Toronto, called "From What This Something Flows From Me, What You Call Time," and it was a connection between Nexus and Seiji Ozawa, who was for a time the conductor of the Toronto Symphony in the 1960s. So Takemitsu had a really, I think, intimate connection to Toronto, which I'm so glad that you have sort of honored in your choice today. Thank you so much.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you to everybody who is joining this afternoon. We are on the cusp of our third session, which will be, I'm sure, fascinating. And I am joined by the host of that session now, Arya Umezawa, who is a co-founder of Amplified Opera. It is now afternoon. Good afternoon, Arya.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for having me today.
Yes, it's great to see you. And thank you so much for your help, for the help of Amplified Opera in co-presenting the Teiya's remarkable production, which premiered last night on the Confluence YouTube channel. I just want to remind people watching that if they haven't watched that yet, it is available until February 25th on the channel. And Arya, over to you for the third session.
Oh my goodness, we're starting 3 minutes early.
Well, why not? Well, we could chat for a little while if you'd like.
No,
but,
you know what? Why don't we just dive right in, because I think we're up for a very interesting conversation. So welcome, everybody. I hope you had a wonderful break and enjoyed some of the beautifully curated music by Chihiro. Thank you for joining us for this symposium's final panel. As Larry mentioned, my name is Ari Umezawa. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a mixed race Nikkei Canadian. I am an opera artist who lives in Takaranto, colonially known as Toronto, and I'm one of the co-founders of Amplified Opera, as well as a stage director. Today, I'm absolutely honored to be joined by Katie Shorb, producing artistic director of Generic Ensemble Company in Texas and director of the Mikado Reclaimed. They are also the vice president of the Consortium of Asian American Theater Artists and assistant professor at Allegheny College's Department of Communications, Film, and Theater. Katie, it's so wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to see you again, Arya.
Awesome. And today, Katie and I are joined by Eiki Isomura, a Japanese-American conductor who is completing his 4th season as artistic director and conductor of Opera in the Heights in Texas. Eiki is also on the music staff of Opera in the Ozark and has worked as a conductor and pianist for HGO Co., where he's helped prepare the world premieres of numerous chamber operas for Houston Grand Opera. Welcome, Eiki. It's also great to see you again.
Great to see you. Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit of a weird reunion, a beautiful reunion in a way, for the three of us. So before we jump into our conversation this afternoon, I would just like those of you watching to know that we'll be taking a few questions over the course of this discussion. So if there's anything you're itching to ask this group of artists, please feel free to leave those questions in the live stream chat, and we'll try and get to as many as we possibly can. But to just sort of start us off, I think if I were to sum up the day, I might say that we started this morning off with the producer's perspective on the challenges and opportunities of Madama Butterfly. Then we had an opportunity to hear from the world of academia, where Professor Hisama asked, what can we do with pieces like Butterfly? So I think it's only fair that we end with a conversation from the perspective of the people who do, namely us artists, who, for better or for worse, because of who we are and the fact that we engage with the medium of opera, are very much tied to the piece Madama Butterfly. So we're going to explore this topic from an artist's perspective, specifically how we tackle Madama Butterfly in a more traditional setting where we don't have perhaps the freedom to transform the work to the same degree that Teiya did with the Butterfly project, where we might have no say in casting, or where we might be inheriting sets and props, or where we've inherited really truly this legacy that Puccini has built around this piece. So I guess to start us off, I'd love to ask sort of maybe Katie first and then Aki, what your relationship is with Madama Butterfly, and have you as an artist found your way into this piece, and if so, how?
Thank you, Aria. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm very excited. So the first thing I would say is it's such a hard piece. I know that this whole day is about how it's such a hard piece, and I think we need to really recognize that we're not going to magical think racism away. And so I personally have kind of been dancing around the piece. There's a way that I am really interested in engaging with it, but I also feel that I am not ready to engage in the piece as a stage director until I can be sure that I have a lot of control over what meaning is made on stage. So I think projects like Teiya's project are kind of a model that we can use to follow and even if we do Butterfly as it is written in the score. I love that the previous panel talked about, well, scores can be changed and text can be changed, and we really need to remind ourselves of that. But I think there's a way that it can exist as a text as is, but our interpretation can be radically changed, and that's something that I look forward to, hopefully in the future, being able to engage with. So that's my kind of initial response. My analogous personal relationship to a piece that depicts Japaneseness in a problematic way is I directed The Mikado Reclaimed, and in that process it was a completely deconstructed process. So I think that trusting people of Asian descent to show the stories that are supposed to be about people of Asian descent is an important step in terms of looking at the problematics of a show like Madama Butterfly.
Absolutely. I can't remember who said it in the previous panel, but I think it was perhaps Kunio Hara said intervention, and I feel like paratextual intervention is sort of the way to go with works like Madama Butterfly. But Aki, what about you? What is your relationship to this piece? You're muted, Aki.
Sorry about that. Like some people have also related in their own personal experience. My first experiences with the piece were within academia in the course of my training, and it was just this artifact that made me uncomfortable in general. And I had engaged with the work as a vocal coach, and it wasn't until 2018 that I actually took on a fully staged production of it as a conductor and as a translator. It was Pacific Opera Project's Josh Shaw who approached me to help create a Japanese-English bilingual production, and we co-produced it and presented it in Los Angeles and in Houston. And our aim was to try to explore how these characters might have actually communicated with one another. And so Japanese characters singing, Japanese American characters singing in English, and then a couple of bilingual characters who are acting as interpreters that help carry the action along. And it was very challenging intellectually and creatively to try to put this material and reframe it so that they're coming out of the mouths of Japanese characters and Japanese American performers. And Aria, you were hugely helpful to me as a consultant and advisor on the front end, especially when I had my doubts about being able to pull this off sensitively and responsibly. And I'm so grateful to you for helping me, for giving me courage and insight in approaching this task. And since then, I have been tied to Butterfly, perhaps viewed as someone with a particular or strong take on the piece and its problems, and I've been asked to share my thoughts on it from time to time. And I wouldn't consider myself an authority on the piece for even a second, but I've certainly wrestled it with a great deal, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Eiki. Yeah, I sort of if I can sort of be a bit more transparent than perhaps one is usually on a panel like this, I sort of feel like the inspiration for this panel was just to have publicly the type of conversations that all three of us and our other Asian Pacific Islander colleagues across North America have been having in private, but just publicly, because these conversations have been happening for years now, just sort of in terms of finding that kind of collegial support when we're tackling this work. If I can go off script for 1 second as well and continue that, Eiki, I was sort of thinking, you sent me your production notes on that production, and they've been published in BroadwayWorld.com. Maybe I'll try and find a way to distribute that link for anyone who's curious. And I have to say, they're some of the best, most cathartic notes I've ever read in a program before. They were just so honest and so thoughtful. And they really captured, I think, the conflict of what it means to be an Asian artist trying to grapple or being called to grapple with this material. And you asked two questions in particular that I know really hit me hard. In those notes, you asked, am I validating and lending undeserved credibility to an unfair portrayal of this culture? And am I performing this, and by performing this work, will I be pigeonholing myself within the profession? Have you meditated on those questions anymore since then? Have you begun to form answers for yourself on those questions?
I've thought about it some more, and I'm generally finding myself always siding on wanting to be a voice in the room if I can, understanding that it is such a presence in the canon, and I don't see it going away. And so if there are going to be creatives and performers who are going to take this on anyway, I would like to have my voice there. And it could be in a very different capacity from the one I enjoyed with Pacific Opera Project and Opera in the Heights, where I'm literally taking the libretto and putting it through new eyes and words. Even if it is a traditional production, I would make sure that I was given space to give context, provide more information for the people experiencing the piece, and being somehow an agent for compensating for the piece's flaws in one way or another, whether it's through the rehearsal process, or if it's outside of it, if it's ancillary events, conversations like these. I'd like to be involved, and so I want to always acknowledge the problems of the piece, and be one of the people there to call attention to them and to stimulate discussion. So And yeah, again, Aria, I think that when I first reached out to you and was really unsure about how to approach the unfair portrayals, and I had these insecurities about taking part in this in this piece that I had so many issues with, and I had a lot of insecurities about this very issue about whether or not I was validating these portrayals, and you told me that there are things that we can do to accompany the piece. If the piece is getting something wrong, then it's up to us to also present perhaps another portrayal to accompany it, and so that's something that I've been trying to think more about. That if I'm ever afforded an opportunity to produce it or present it in some way, to always co-present other ways to honor Japan and to honor the culture, even if it might not be completely possible, even if it might be impossible through the means of the piece itself.
Yeah, I know. I'll sort of answer my own. I'll answer my own question very quickly, but I'll say just for myself that Butterfly was never a show that I dreamed of directing or being tied to in any way. And just, as a baseline, I like to ask, what are the stories we aren't telling? And in opera, Madama Butterfly is a story, like even just as a baseline, Madama Butterfly is a story we've told. So it doesn't particularly fit the bill of what inspires me. For example, neither does Figaro, which I also have never really aspired to direct. But so there's that as a baseline. And then, as you said, Eiki, on top of that, I think when I think about working on a show, I feel like it's my responsibility as the director to love the show and all of the characters that are in it. And I'm really glad that Teiya brought up the hurt that comes with this show in the first panel, and that Professor McClary in the second panel elucidated what some of those things are in the second panel. But I feel like because of how Japanese culture is misrepresented on stage, for example, the conflation of Buddhist and Shinto deities, the misspelling of location names, or how two of the supposedly Japanese folk tunes that Puccini used as, or alluded to in his score, are actually of Chinese origin. And because, as has been brought up a number of times today, most productions of Butterfly will contain some form of yellowface, even in the form of just the chorus, because of how opera is produced in North America right now, and because of how the story ends with this very troubling depiction of the death of an Asian woman. I feel like I have to work really, really hard to love Butterfly. Like, I have to work so hard, and I almost have to work against myself as I move through the piece. And I will say I always get there, because that's my job. I'll always find a way to love the production that I'm working on. I feel like I got to that place where my heart was starting to flutter for the COC production that never was in January. And I'm starting to feel those flutters for the production that's coming up in Hawaii. But I think it's worth stating from the perspective of an artist that I don't start with inspiration or curiosity when it comes to this particular title. I actually start from a place of anger, and I have to work with myself to channel that anger into an expression of love. And in that way, sort of say or do something with this piece that I think I would be comfortable showing my father or my community here in Toronto that I grew up with. And so yet, in spite of all of this, I feel, like Eiki said, a sense of duty to this work, because I know if it's going to get put up there, like, I feel responsible that there should be some care for the artists who are involved or the audiences who might encounter it. And I wonder, Katie, do you experience a similar form of, do you feel any kind of responsibility to these works as an artist?
It's interesting. The short answer, no. I don't feel a responsibility to the pieces. Puccini's super dead. Like, he's so dead. I'm glad he's dead. Sorry. But like, if he were alive now, I mean, we'd all hate him and be reporting him to the police. So sorry. But I don't feel a responsibility to Madama Butterfly, the artifact. And I also know opera loves that piece. So my responsibility is to audiences. My responsibility is to the people who I kind of wish would come to opera. And so I don't find it, I think it's great that you're like, I'm angry, because like, that's how I would probably show up if, like, with Mikado, which is my analogous fake Japaneseness and approaching it as a Japanese American. Like, I hate watch that so much in the process of devising a new piece around it. And I think it's important to kind of have an exorcism of that, because the hatred comes from the harm that I've experienced. So I feel a responsibility, in a way, first and foremost, to any people of Japanese descent, any people of Asian descent who might have felt harm from this piece, and of which there are many people who work on the piece. And then I think, so what do we do now? And there's a way that I think the story Madama Butterfly, a Japanese woman who is exploited by an American man and then has a tragic end, that story, yes, has been told so many times. But can we use the ingredients to tell actually a different story? And I think part of it is, I think of it as, how can I trick and lull the audience into accidentally thinking about things like racism, colonialism, because the piece is actually, yes, it's about this beautiful woman, blah, 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 oh, tragic, but it's about racial anxiety. It's about Europe being scared that Japan might become a superpower. It's about, oh my goodness, Japan just beat Russia in a war. Like the Japanese-Russian war ended the Russo-Japanese war, sorry. Have to put Russia first. The Russo-Japanese War just ended. The treaty got signed like in the same year that Butterfly premiered. So it's about that, to me, and the tragedy and the wonderful, that they are beautiful arias. I'm not completely, without some affinity towards the piece. That I want to tell that story, the racial anxiety story, but not from the anxiety of a European, but from the side of what happens to me when you're anxious about my race. That's going to be, I see some questions that might be for me, but we can get to them in a second. I want to pass it back to Aria because I want to let you facilitate, because that's your job.
Oh my gosh, I feel like this is just a fun conversation amongst friends that happens to be viewed by about 80 people right now. So maybe we should actually get to this first question, because I think it links on to what you were just saying, Katie. The question is, and I'm sorry, I don't know who this is from, but it says, I was intrigued by the idea of encouraging critical attitudes about this piece without changing libretto and score. I'd love to hear more ideas in this direction. And that's from Dr. Nina Penner.
I'll start, and then hopefully Aki might have some, and Aria might have some ideas. It's such a challenge, and I will be honest, I've wanted to do this with a lot of text I feel problematic. Another is Good Person of Sichuan. The kind of, the thing I think about when I plan and fantasize in my head is Anne Bogart's production of her skin's as tender as a baseball glove, South Pacific. So Anne did a production of South Pacific, and rather than, setting it in Tahiti, all these problems, setting it in Tahiti with Tahitians, she set it in a VA hospital, a veteran VA, military veterans hospital, and they have PTSD from being in, I believe, the Vietnam War. And so they're putting on South Pacific as a therapeutic way to deal with their PTSD. And the dialogue and the numbers happen in exactly the order that Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote them, and they tell a different story. And I think that, you know, we have this all the time happening, actually in our daily lives, when people say things, but they actually mean something else. But I think as a creative medium, opera and theater allows room for the disconnect or that can happen between extant text and what our bodies do on stage. And part of that is training audiences. Yes, the blue hairs want Chō-Chō San to be this, like, basically an Italian woman in a beautiful kimono, and dying spectacularly in a very specific through the neck way, which isn't a thing. It's nice to be in a room where you, like, it's like, well, Japanese suicide, like historical Japanese suicide, does not involve the neck. Anyways, that's been my pet peeve for like years. So if you want to know how it happens, you can Google it, but or how it used to happen historically. And so I know that blue hairs want to see that. We don't need to be, I think opera companies, producers need to know that. And like, I wish opera companies would be more brave about, you know, losing subscribers, losing donors, and instead recognize that yes, companies are sources of entertainment, but come to be a source of education. And so we can educate the blue hairs to expect to hear a beautiful aria in a different context, and they can still enjoy the aria, but maybe they might have to think about other stuff. That's my general answer to the question.
Maybe Eiki, do you have any thoughts in the same direction?
Well, I'm just thinking about my personal experience of you know, really grappling with the libretto on a hands-on way, and some of the choices that I was forced to make. And I always try to go back to whatever goal we have in mind when we engage with the piece. My personal goal with Butterfly at the time was to remind our audience that these temporary marriages actually happened, and that there were real Chō-Chō Sans out there who were victimized this way, and to remind our audience that these are real people. If we can somehow deconstruct these stereotypes and develop deeper readings. And so one thing I tried to do was build in some deferential language when a person of lower rank was speaking to a senior, trying to build in those social codes. But I didn't, and I read about this in my program note, that one thing I didn't want to do was to fix the libretto's inaccuracies. I didn't feel that it was my responsibility to somehow figure out how to undo the conflation of Buddhist and Shinto deities, like Arya was mentioning. I left those in because I didn't want to do all of the work of rehabilitating the piece and to give my stamp of approval. I said, here, I'm a Japanese American and I have fixed Madame Butterfly. I wanted to acknowledge that it's always going to be problematic and it's always going to do harm. And here's one of the really thorny bits. And I'm going to leave that right here for you all to recognize. And I'm going to make sure you know that it's there when I write my note and when we curate the piece with conversations before and after, to recognize it's there are no complete solutions, just attempts to well, see it through new eyes. And my only goal was to hopefully generate more empathy amongst the performers and the audience for these characters. And it was not necessarily an attempt to make it more Japanese. I think I somehow did some of that in the process, but I knew that ultimately, based on how it was originally conceived, that wasn't always going to be fully possible. So my hope is that for producers and for creatives to always make sure that every subsequent production has a goal, a thesis, something that it aims to examine. And my hope is that unexamined traditional productions of this piece will be a thing of the past. But my hope is that works like Teiya's can inspire us to program traditional productions less, so that we might be able to make more room for the sorts of readings that Teiya has given us.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this question, I hesitate because I'm not, even though the production never happened, I don't know how much I'm allowed to speak about what was going to happen for that production of Butterfly. But I feel like, similar to some of the things both you and Katie have said, my personal thoughts on this was, for me, this is such an Italian framing of Japanese culture. Like, this is so, any kind of direct intervention feels like we're just adding more artifice, or adding artifice on top of artifice in a way, for me. So my hope was, instead of trying to correct anything in the score, in the story, or in the telling, or in the mistakes that we know have been made, was actually to take the audience's attention and really focus on who's framing this story, who's looking at this story, who is telling us what to think about this story. So my hope for that production was, instead of trying to reconcile anything, to just call out what this piece is, say, this is who is framing this story, this is who is deciding how the story goes down, and then hopefully giving an opportunity at the end for us to reject that and say, we're not down with this. We don't want to do this anymore. Or at least I don't want to do this anymore, was sort of how I was hoping to end the piece. But I won't say too much more about that, because again, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about it. But anyway, so that was just sort of very high level what we were trying to do there.
Can I say something too?
Yeah.
In direct response, is I have some ideas too. And I'm like you actually were working on a show, and I'm I don't want a spoiler alert. And also there's this thing where when you're a stage director and you're oh, this might be a thing, it's a bummer, but we can't necessarily always talk about it, especially when we don't know everybody who's here. And that's also kind of I think you and I, Aria, we could have a conversation about what our strategies might be to accomplish our missions, because we've talked, elsewhere. But there's a weird thing where it's all of us have to be we can do a Butterfly differently, but until someone has explicitly commissioned it from us, we're not going to tell you how it's going to be.
Yeah.
So there, and then there's a isolation that can happen between artists of Asian descent, that literally I've just been trolling around all of these panels and being I saw Aria at a panel and I'm hey, I don't know you and I live 3,000 miles away from you, but can we be friends? So I guess the internet is good in that way. And also there's a way that the Asian Opera Alliance just formed, for example, in this past year. And the isolation can be real, and it can feel like I have been in rehearsal rooms where I have literally pointed to racist lines in an opera and had people say, well, that's humor. You just don't understand Italian humor. And I'm you mean you're going to take someone who died 150 years ago and their humor over someone standing in front of you saying, this is harmful to people of X, Y, and Z demographic. And that kind of gaslighting is so pervasive in opera. That's why I think that training the audience should be, like, that sounds weird, but that should be a mission of opera companies. Maybe they won't tell the audience that that's what they're doing, but you know, as directors, like, we tell the audience what this show is going to look like in the first 3 minutes of the show. And that is a convention that the audience generally accepts. And like, when they don't accept it, they give us bad reviews. But so whole companies can embrace that as this is the language we are starting to engage with. And if it's a problem, that, you know, thank you very much. You don't have to keep coming back. It's scary, I know, especially when you have multi-million-dollar budgets. But I just don't think that companies can have it both ways. I don't think that you get to be known as like a company that's intervening and a company that gives everybody what they want. You kind of have to commit. And I think like this panel is proof that there are brilliant artists and thinkers that are willing to be on board on, if you commit to we're intervening, if you commit to we're actually in the 21st century. And I think that is very important. I'm kind of sort of answering a question.
Well, I'm going to like move us to that next question now, Katie. So maybe I'll start with Aki this time. But we have a question from John. I'm assuming this is John Jilks, but I could be wrong. The question is, do you think that a panel discussion listened to by 70 to 80 people, however brilliant, can balance off the harm done by a traditional production of Madama Butterfly, like the COCs, which will be seen by maybe 15? I'm assuming that's 1,500, but 15,000 is like stadium level attendees. But Aki, what are your thoughts on that?
Maybe over the course of the run, who knows? But what I would say, I can only speak from my experience of having experienced Butterfly project and feeling very inspired by it. And what I saw was a model forward for engaging with the work. And what I saw from it was someone taking the same ingredients that Puccini appropriated and then reclaiming them, and it felt like time travel, and it was just so powerful, and I want more eyeballs on it. And I understand that we might not have 15,000 eyeballs on it right now, but my hope is that the people who do see it advocate for it and advocate for more room for these takes, and to continue to point out the problems with the traditional productions, such that we can, again, just perhaps program the traditional productions less frequently, and that already is doing less harm. Do I think that a discussion viewed by 70 to 80 people can undo the harm? I don't think so, but I don't think that was really the goal in the first place.
Yeah, we're trying to push the needle, not maybe necessarily do a complete about face in one fell swoop. But I think, 70 to 80 people watching this discussion, and I would say the people that I know are watching the discussion are themselves incredibly brilliant, thoughtful people. Those people have brilliant networks of people with whom they can continue these discussions, and those people will likely have brilliant networks of people as well. And I think, we might not have a 15,000 person reach right now, but we could potentially have that if the conversation continues. So maybe, Katie brought up that we as artists, when we're talking about sort of the future productions or things like that. Like, I think Katie's right. I would turn to them in a heartbeat if I was like, can I just soundboard these ideas off of you and tell me if you think they're dramaturgically like totally off base. And Aki, same thing. I'd be like, can I use your musical knowledge to just let me know if I've just made a horrible mistake? And would give you sort of more concrete details. But I wonder if either specifically or more broadly, what both of your thoughts are on what the artistic opportunities are for a piece like Madama Butterfly today. Because I mean, as I think both panels so far have acknowledged, it's not as simple as like, this piece is absolutely worthless and should never be performed anywhere ever again. And that there's complexity and nuance to this conversation. So I wonder, do either of you see artistic opportunities for Madama Butterfly? And specifically, let's narrow the scope and say Madama Butterfly for North American audiences in the 21st century. And maybe Aki, can we start with you on that one?
Sure. If you couldn't already tell, the angle I'm advocating for the most is let's program this piece a little less. That's where I'm coming from at this, and that if unless we have a helpful take on this, unless it addresses the harm that the piece has done, that we shouldn't do it. But it will always be programmed because people are in love with the music, and so I don't know if this is a performance practice that has gotten much hold, but one way forward might be to have fewer fully staged productions of it and have it presented in concert, and really focus on the music if that is what's so precious about it. And then I think the work that's being done right now with this symposium, such that we have honest discussions about the harm the piece does, and why some problems can never be fully resolved without those conversations prefacing and being part of the digestion of any production. I would rather see it not done. So I wish I had a more inspiring answer about the future and opportunities for the piece. But the future for me, my hope is the end of unexamined productions.
Katie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I have many levels. One is Yellowface has to end, period. The end. When I participated in Wolf Trap, which is one of the best young artist programs in the country, I see people of Asian descent as singers. So hire Asian singers to be in Butterfly. That's just first and foremost. And if you can't find them, you have a problem. Because there are many, and some of them might be younger or maybe not as experienced, but they exist in the United States in abundance. So no more Yellowface. That is like such an opportunity with this opera, and that is why I'm very vociferous when I see any Yellowface productions of Butterfly, because there's just no excuse. Like, pay for the housing, pay for the flight, or don't program it, period, the end. And the other thing is, on the other side is the production teams also need to be, including is the wrong word, like aggressively involve not just individuals of Asian descent or people of the global majority, but communities. And so, if there's a Butterfly that goes on and it's in partnership with the Japanese American Center, if you're in a San Francisco, or just the Asian Cultural Arts Center in a lot of less Asian populated cities, to me, I'm like, okay, that's cool. And if those communities are like, this is great, then I respect those community needs that are localized. So there just needs to be much more involvement of people of Asian descent, of people of the global majority. And then I do think that Teiya's piece is the future of Butterfly. That's how we're gonna, like, all the favorite numbers, all the favorite arias are going to survive. Because otherwise, people who I teach who are between the ages of 18 to 22 have no patience for casual racism. And those people are going to be of the age where they can afford opera tickets not too long from now. And they're going to want something different. And it's going to be the companies who are willing to do things different, like the BLOs, who are like, let's step back. Let's think about what's wrong with this. Let's involve a lot of young people and people who've been thinking about this, to bring opera into the 22nd century. And so that's the opportunity. It's absolutely an opportunity, but it has to be real. It can't be fixed in a fast. There's no Band-Aid. It's a process.
Thanks, Katie. I agree. There's one. So the production person in me is like eye bouncing back to the clock in here, and we have one more audience discussion question that I think is a big one that maybe we can try and answer in 5-ish minutes. But this is a question from Wayne. Wayne asks, why no discussion of Madama Butterfly's depiction of sex tourism with an adult preying on a minor? Why do issues, no matter how real, around representation of race trump more troubling moral issues? That's a pretty big question to try and answer concisely and quickly. Do either of you feel compelled to jump in with a first crack at an answer on that one?
I'll say that could be a panel, but that's not the one we're doing.
Yeah.
That's my short answer.
I think the short answer is that it is to some extent, I wouldn't say outside of the scope of this particular conversation, but it's absolutely an important topic, and we shouldn't really be they shouldn't be competing with one another. These panels don't have to do everything, and that there can be other panels that coexist. We're here for this particular conversation, and it's good to raise this question so that after this conversation there can be other ones, and that can be part of the ripple effect of this symposium.
I see this very much as a yes and question. I don't know that the questions around representation of race trump this moral issue. And I don't know that the fact that sex tourism and sex tourism is something that one could pull out of Madama Butterfly is something that perhaps is like the first thing we should be discussing when framing Butterfly as well. I think these conversations of representation are important to have, as my co-panelists have said. So thank you for that question. Maybe we're thinking a Madama Butterfly, Angel's Bones kind of mashup panel for the next symposium on this topic. Thank you so much for that question, Wayne. We have 8 minutes left.
Can I say one last thing about
of course,
that?
Yes.
Is that of course is that race is not necessarily extricable from things like exploitation of minors and sex tourism. If you think about many of the places in the world that are known for sex tourism, there is a racial dynamic that happens there. And so I'm not saying that's the only dynamic, but the topics we're bringing up are being framed as racialized, and they're not the only. Race isn't the only vector that we are actually talking about. So I take umbrage with the question, because to me, and I'm sure that this was not meant, but to me, to say why are we always talking about race is basically I'm tired of this conversation. And until racism is over, we should not be tired of the conversation. And there are, of course, other things to talk about, and oftentimes they are related to racism. And so I hope that it's a question that comes up a lot, is why do we keep talking about race? And until I stop seeing racism, I feel like I'm going to keep talking about it.
Thanks, Katie. I think I see that we have a few other questions, but I did have a wrap-up question for us this panel, because I think, I know from experience with both of you that these questions could very easily balloon into like 3-hour conversations when we only blocked out an hour for it. So maybe we should just like be very diligent with ourselves today. So my last question that I wanted to bring up is, I think we've expressed a lot of internal conflict, a lot of feelings about being artist practitioners who are called to engage with this material. I just want to throw it out there. To what end are we engaging with this material? Is there an agenda? Do we have an agenda? What does the future of Butterfly look like? I know we sort of touched on it, but just sort of to start and end in a very like forward-looking kind of way. What are our thoughts? Eiki, any thoughts?
Well, it's something that this conversation has been doing in my mind is it's raising the bar for producers, and it has raised the questions that anyone attempting the work ought to have, well thought out answers for, or at least personal and honest answers for. And something that Perrin said very early on was, when there were casting struggles, a legitimate question that was floated was, well, should it be produced at all in the first place, if it can't be cast sensitively? And I think as we have more of these conversations, we can be part of companies raising the standard for themselves, so that they can be forced to allocate their resources in such a way to program it and to produce it more responsibly. And without education, without these discussions, the companies won't really know what that would look like. And so we're all part of that today. And my hope is that, because of these conversations, companies will understand that producing Butterfly is going to take a lot of creativity, and it's going to take a lot of effort that might not have been part of their practice, and expanding their network in their efforts in casting ought to become part of the new performance practice of Butterfly, even in the most traditional productions.
Yeah, thank you, Eiki. Katie, thoughts?
Gonna have to stage manage myself. So my personal mission as an artist is how do I make work that leads to liberation, that leads to freedom? I'm also Buddhist, so to me, how I do that is not ignoring or denying the problems in the world. When I recognize a problem, I engage with it artistically, and hopefully it's beautiful and moving and what have you. But that's the like first thing. I think that the arts should be healing, and just like how doctors pledge not to do harm first, I think that artists need to do the same. So first, do no harm, then let's go to healing. So there's, being that Butterfly has been so harmful, there's so much opportunity of healing. And it's just, we need to be really smart. We need to be really patient, and we need to have a lot of faith in that. And for some situations, that's just not going to work. But we need to be trusting the people who are the voices of tomorrow to lead to preserving what needs to be preserved, and to discard what cannot be anything other than harmful.
Katie, thank you so much. I do want to sort of, this is again another question that I want to answer myself as well, which is not strictly facilitator best practices, but I do keep asking myself, whose stories, whose voices do we not see when we center Puccini's vision of Japan or Puccini's vision of China as in our operatic discussions. We stop looking at the people, we stop seeing people, and we stop seeing their complicated, prismatic expressions of Japanese, Asian, Chinese, the whole big umbrella. We stop seeing how complicated and nuanced those expressions and those stories are when we just center this one story all the time. And so I think my hope with engaging in Madama Butterfly as an artist is, in whatever way I can, to show whose story is not being told, or to ask, at least get the audience questioning, who are we not seeing in this production because we are focusing so hard on Puccini. And that's, I'm so thrilled that Chihiro was willing to come in and show us what some of those complicated and nuanced expressions of Japanese art were, contemporary Japanese art are, because we are not looking at them when we have these conversations all the time. And I think that that's something that is really powerful, that we can do with a title like this. So with that said, 1 o'clock on the nose, I'm going to try and wrap this up really, really quickly. Katie, Eiki, thank you so, so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to chat with me today. I think, for better or for worse, one of the truly, truly beautiful things about Madama Butterfly, and what that title has brought me, is it has connected me to both of you, and many other colleagues who are engaging in these conversations as well. And I think that's something to be truly grateful for when it comes to where my life is going and how it's moving. For those of you who submitted questions, thank you so much for engaging with us. And to those whose questions we weren't able to get to, I really apologize, but hopefully we can address those questions in a future symposium. And with that, I think to conclude the session, we should throw it back to a person we've invoked many, many times over the course of this symposium, my good colleague, Teiya Kasahara, to close us out. Thank you so much again.
Thank you all very, very much. Wow, I am truly overwhelmed and full of feelings of inspiration and hope and complexity inside my body right now. Thank you for cultivating such a beautiful space that we could all come together and really express honestly and thoughtfully all of these complexities that are involved not only in this work, but in our art form, in opera. Yes, I'd like to thank you so much for being a part of this symposium today, for gathering here online from many places and time zones, and hearing everyone share their incredible insight and experiences today has really reconfirmed for me that these conversations are so necessary. But what has really been clarifying is that there are many meaningful ways forward to honor these people's stories, experiences, and cultures alongside opera. I feel like there is still so much work to be done, but I feel emboldened to continue on that path. And I'm glad to be doing it with colleagues like yourselves. So thank you so much. Feeling very, very humbled. And with that, I'd like to thank specifically all the panelists and hosts for their time and energy and insight today. Marion Newman, Larry Beckwith, Jaclyn Grossman, Perrin Lich, Jessica Johnson-Brock, Chihiro Yasufuku, Dr. Carol Clark, Dr. Eli Hisama, Dr. Susan McClary, Dr. Kunio Hara, Eiki Isomura, KT Shorb, Aria Umezawa, and to Taylor Long from the Canadian Opera Company for keeping us looking spectacular online today. I want to thank the producers of the event, Confluence Concerts, specifically Larry Beckwith and Jennifer Collins. Thank you so much for all your work. The Canadian Opera Company, the University of Toronto Faculty of Music, and the Humanity Initiative at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, with big shout outs to Dr. Linda Hutchin and Dr. Carol Clark for their help in envisioning and planning this symposium. And also my special thanks goes to my co-founders and my opera family at Amplified Opera, Marion Newman, also the curator for the Butterfly Project, Asata Tenekun, and Aria Umezawa. I wouldn't want to do this job with anybody else, so thank you. And last but not least, thank you to my family and my friends for being on this journey with me as well. Please share this conversation with your colleagues, share the video, share the link. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's make these ripples bigger and bigger. And if you want to check out more of these types of conversations, please go to the Boston Lyric Opera website and check out their butterfly process. All of their conversations are free, and they are also made available online for free. So if you missed the one in December, January, February, they are going to be online, and they already are online. Please check them out. Thank you so very much for everything. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye.